After this short briefing, welcome, Agnieszka, you come up here and you're going to present for us Contemplative Landscapes for Sustainable Tourism.
Hey, thank you.
Basically, just enough embarrassed.
Yeah. So, thanks, Theo. It was actually your big initiative to choose the place and just make everything happen. So, thanks a lot for being our host here. And yeah, I want to welcome everyone to our first in-person NeuroLandscape meeting. And I'm really glad that everyone of you made it all the way until here. So it's quite a trip. It was, yeah, for all of us, it was quite a trip, but I'm sure we will be able to enjoy it. And as we are all explorers and wanderers, we will have a chance to explore each other's ideas, stay open to a lot of new disciplines, and explore these beautiful landscapes of Andros as well. So my presentation today, Contemplative Landscapes for Sustainable Tourism, is something new that is putting a mark a little bit on the fact that this year was quite special for NeuroLandscape in a way that we actually branched out to a little bit more broader topics related to social and political science. And we tried to apply our research, our collective skills and knowledge to things that are happening around us on like a much larger level in the European Union. And we applied for some interesting grants that we'll hear about also during our presentations. And a lot of that was connected to sustainable tourism, and since we are in this beautiful touristy place, I thought it will be a good starting topic for the event. So that photo that is a little bit not perfect quality is actually from Andros from 2016, where was the first time I visited this place. And yeah, today I think this time it will be a little bit different because I already saw much different plants, even though it's just 1 month difference, because last time we were here in June and now in May it's already completely different looking, just because different species of plants are flowering. Okay, so first of all, what are contemplative landscapes? So actually, with time, from the beginning when this term was conceived, the definition of contemplative landscape is getting shorter and shorter each year, and the more I know, the more I dig into that and the more I try to establish the definition, it becomes shorter, which makes me very happy because I really like simplifying things in opposition to making them more complicated. So the contemplative landscapes are simply the landscapes that can trigger mental health benefits in the observer. And those benefits can be measured with specific different ways, for example, brain activity, mood measurements, levels of relaxation and stress reduction. So many different ways. At the beginning, I really thought it's just going to be EEG, but the more you start to understand your own the concepts that you study, the more you kind of branch out, and it's actually applying to any benefits on mental health that you can imagine. So the contemplative landscape, so yeah, the definition kind of has to include what actually landscapes are, and in this definition I prefer to look at them as in a so-called phenomenological way. So it's actually here, but you can't see. That phenomenology is a discipline of philosophy that basically in the most simple way it wants to see things as they are perceived from the point of view of human being, with their senses, and without adding any abstract layers to it, any abstract forms or meaning. You just see it as it is. So when we look at landscapes from many different perspectives, we can see them as a region, as a map, as a satellite photo. But for the contemplative landscape definition, it is an image that the human perceives with the eyes and the senses. So they can be, that's why I put in this graph something like that. So this is the landscape for the contemplative landscape definition. The contemplative landscapes can be identified, measured, and quantified with a contemplative landscape model, which is a tool that I started working on during my PhD research. And so basically, the human perceives the landscape in the form of images, and it has influence on the brain. That's why I started with the methods of neuroscience, but in fact, other methods are also good to combine with neuroscience and see what's going on in the brain, but also in the other parts of our body or in the society even at large. So this is a contemplative landscape model that we will have chance to learn a little bit about during the workshop, the small workshop I prepared for, I think, day 2. And this is me using it outdoors, and we'll try to do that together during this stay. So here is kind of fun, bunch of fun facts about the critiques of contemplative landscape, which I didn't really share with anyone before, but it is like how painful it was at the beginning to actually come up with this term and the whole research, build all research around the new area and completely new topic, new concept. So this is a photo from my PhD studies, and you can see me here. I'm kind of slightly smiling, very slightly, just because I received my first critique from a very renowned professor from the Harvard University who was visiting our course, and he was a major guest. He's a legend in landscape architecture.
What's his name?
I don't know if I can say it on the record. Because, like, if you're a landscape architect, you know this guy. He basically invented geographical information systems that all the world is using now. So it's kind of like Bill Gates of landscape architecture and regional planning. He is, I think, now Professor Emeritus at Harvard University, and he was visiting our course.
Only that he criticized your work, it's already credit enough.
But wait for it.
He got interested.
He's lucky he's in the same picture with you.
And he's smiling.
Okay, this is what he said. So during the whole workshop with him, I ran in my head what I'm gonna ask him, because it was the last semester where we had time, until the end of the semester, we had time to come up with the final topic and research idea for our PhD. So I had my contemplative landscapes in my head. And it was 3 months before there was this workshop, and I had intention to really ask this guy what he thinks about my idea and if it has any chance to stand in the international arena of landscape architecture, and what this guy, this very respectable guy, is really thinking about. So I approached him completely shaking, completely intimidated about everything, starting from my English, if it's good enough, to the fact that he was already tired and leaving the event and like on the way to go. But I approached him and I asked, something like, so I have the research idea for my PhD in mind. I would like to make it about contemplative landscapes. And I was thinking, like, is there some way I could measure the contemplative landscapes and how they influence a person, and then identify them in a space, and then see what are the contemplative landscapes and what are not contemplative landscapes. So he thought a little bit, and he said that it's not feasible because everyone contemplates in a different ways, and he, for himself, he likes contemplating in the toilet while he's sitting in the bathroom. So it is so individual. He recommends me to change my approach and completely redefine the topic of my thesis. So yeah, that was it. I also heard other critiques from the professors of my PhD. In the final presentation, I presented my topic, what I will be studying, what I will be researching on. They said, this is not landscape architecture. And they failed me, so I dropped, like they said, so it was very strange situation because they, after the presentations, all students presented their PhD proposals. They announced, like, all students passed. They are allowed to return from the new semester, except for one student. And it's Agnieszka.
You're special.
Yeah, so I left, I went home with the notion that that's it, that's the end of my PhD, because it was in landscape architecture. This was the evaluation I got. And somehow, strangely after, in the system, when I checked in the middle of July, when I was already back in Poland on vacation, when I checked in the system, there was a score. There was 13-point score in the Portuguese scale. It's the lowest score that passes. So they did pass me after all for some, I think some internal reasons, maybe because I paid or I don't know. So basically I was still there and kind of beaten up. My ideas completely smashed by the Harvard professor and by my professors at the course. Then when I was already doing my experiment, I got another critique, and it was from the professor, very old one, from Poland. And when I posted, I think on Facebook, I posted about the EEG experiment that it's already completed, that my data collection is completed for my landscape PhD. He wrote a comment, something that would be directly translated from Polish, that the landscape just got stripped from its romanticism, and it is now killed, mummified, and put into a cold lab. So that was another critique. When I was in Singapore, when actually I met Nicole, that day, the professor in psychology and neuroscience introduced me to the lab that Nicole was also working in by saying, so meet Agnieszka, she's landscape architect, and she thinks that planting a couple of trees will actually heal someone's brain. And then, like, yeah, guys, meet Agnieszka. There was like 30 people sitting in the lab, so that was very funny. Mm-hmm. I took it as a kind of like critique. And then what I hear every time I present my ideas to people in neuroscience, I hear the same critique that you can't expect any big effects. Yes?
I need to ask you, like, so why did you decide to just pull with it, to just keep on going, and why you didn't change your topic?
I don't actually know why. Because I had some
gut feeling.
Gut feeling. Yeah, that would be probably the best answer to that question. Yeah, I just
You were a visionary
I just
and
thought,
they were not.
I just thought, okay, it's just new, but things that I knew will have low chance to be evaluated as, you know, familiar, something that is comfortable for professors.
So first someone is like rejecting it just because it's new and they can already imagine.
Yeah,
this.
probably. So I thought maybe it's that what's happening, and yeah, I don't know. I did have quite a difficult time. It wasn't like easy.
But it's super brave. This is how we change the world, you know. Otherwise,
Oh, it's
here.
anyway. Yeah. So, but it's something I thought I will share because it's kind of fun and like not to brag or anything or make you upset or yeah, it's just I think it's funny path, and I think all the PhDs had to go through a lot of struggles to complete their research and stick with it and actually do it for many years after the PhD. There's always critiques, and you are usually your worst critic after all. But I also met a lot of supportive people on the way, and I managed to complete those actually neuroscience experiments to see if the contemplative landscapes are different from non-contemplative landscapes, and if there's anything really significantly different going on in people's brain once they are exposed to contemplative landscapes and non-contemplative landscapes. So it seems that I will actually onto something, and the data suggests that there is actually some difference. So far there was only 2 EEG experiments, the first in Portugal, which Theo mentioned and took part in. You skewed the data with your brain, probably. So yeah, there was a Portuguese experiment and then one in Singapore with depressed patients. So just in short, the major finding is that there is actually significant differences in brain response when people are exposed to the contemplative landscapes versus the non-contemplative landscapes. So they can be green spaces, they can both be green spaces, but one that has more contemplative landscape features will generate significantly different effects than the one that is not significant. So just greening everything and planting mindlessly any shrubs and lawns everywhere, it doesn't really contribute to well-being or mental health. Or it is better to test it before you assume that it will. Then there is some associations with the scores of contemplative landscapes. The landscapes in high in this contemplative score are also improving the mood and regulating the mood. The stronger effect can be observed in people that are more depressed and have more depressive symptoms. And those patterns in patients and depressed people are associated with a brain pattern that is actually desirable by their therapists. And there are other artificial ways to generate this pattern in the brain, but if it can be done by just visiting park, it's probably easier for them to access that kind of treatment. So it's quite promising and like a start for maybe future research towards like some more accessible depression treatments. And also from my recent observations, this contemplative landscape scores are associated with theta activity out of all brainwaves that we have, which are the lowest frequency waves that are associated with mindfulness or meditation. So it's when our brain is calm and doesn't have too much things to process, just in a very short. So we can say that contemplative landscape model caters for the mental health promotion not really mental health or treatments or in the medical terms, but health promotions, always safer terms to use, especially around medical people. So these are some examples of most contemplative landscapes as scored in the most recent survey with experts. Around the literature, there is a lot of terms and different expressions that are kind of similar or trying to express the same thing that contemplative landscape does. So there are therapeutic, sensory, restorative landscapes, salutogenic landscapes, tranquil landscapes, and also sustainable. Now the word sustainable gets so much different meanings, and it's like just becoming everything and anything.
It's a puzzle.
Yeah.
Brings about health.
But contemplative is starting with more data, more papers that are published. Contemplative also starts to be recognized here and there, but I'm actually the only one scientist who is doing that kind of research. I didn't meet anyone who is studying contemplative landscapes and physiological responses to them. If anything, they would write essays about contemplative landscapes, landscape contemplation. So now the sustainable tourism, how those two are connecting. So sustainable tourism takes full account of its current and future economic, social, and environmental impacts, addressing the needs of visitors, the industry, the environment, and host communities. So that's the definition according to UN, which is very, I would say it's quite vague. It can be anything really, like anything that's now in the legislation can be pulled to this kind of definition, because a lot of things do and are supposed to do those things, right? But the sustainability itself used to be different, had a different meaning before than it has now. And this meaning of sustainability is constantly evolving, I would say. So for example, in 1987, what we call now weak sustainability, at that time it was just called sustainability, and this is the definition which I learned during my bachelor studies. It was the three things, nature, economy, and society, are combined together in equal terms, and where they meet, this is sustainable development or sustainability. Right now, what European Commission and all like world organizations, institutions are leaning towards is more of this model where nature is kind of encapsulating both society and economy. And it was proposed in 2002. So now the definitions are a bit shifted. There is a question, please.
Yes, so if you see it as a Venn diagram, it's, you know Venn diagrams?
Yes.
Okay.
No, yeah.
The new model, in practice, it is all the part of the nature from the previous model.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly that. So it broadens sustainability as long as it covers nature. We don't care anymore about society and economy.
Yeah.
But which is not true, because, I'm sorry, but like this is not what, because then the international institutions are actually trying to show that the sustainable development has to be in line with also like a just transition. So meaning like that also people need to be able to work, they need to be able to function, to like, so it's not, so it actually doesn't depict what they actually are doing in the end.
Yeah, so in fact, it's very blurred. If you would like to get to the bottom of it, just by reading legislations,
It's impossible.
it's really
impossible.
confusing
And contradictory.
blurred, and contradict
Yes,
each other.
it is.
Because and then you've got activists who are like talking about sustainable tourism, but in fact they're talking about responsible travels.
Yeah.
They are talking about ecotourism.
There's no
that is
responsible
sustainable
travel.
tourism, but these are different concepts. And also then nature conservation is another concept, because if you prioritize nature and you do everything to protect the natural habitats, it isn't gonna be nature conservation or conservationist approach.
And no tourism.
But it's not gonna be sustainable development. So sustainable development, sustainability, always will take into consideration society, economy, if not on the equal terms, then in this kind of terms. But sustainable tourism, sustainable development probably would never be what nature conservation is. So that things are confused right now. So I just wanted to make it clear that really what is happening around us, it's quite confusing and blurred, and we just have to be aware of that. So sustainable tourism, according to current agenda and the current definition, is sustainable practices inside the tourism industry. That's why it is not responsible traveling. It's not about the travelers and tourists. It's more about the industry, and it's about acknowledging all impacts of the tourism on the both positive and negative, and minimize those negative and improve and optimize, maximize the positive ones. For example, the negative can be and the impact on the both society and economy and environment. So it's very vague and broad as well. A lot of things can be actually taken under this definition. And for example, the negative impact would be economic leakage, damage to the natural environment, overcrowding, etc. So actions to minimize that would be then called sustainable tourism. And the positive impact would include job creation, preservation of natural heritage, and wildlife preservation, but also health promotion, mental health promotion, which is something that you can already see that links back to contemplative landscapes and all the research about that. Because if we can shift the focus of tourism from not just being entertaining but also therapeutic and healing and good for your health and well-being, then we can already connect it to the research and the research that we do at NeuroLandscape. Just by looking at the landscapes and being exposed to the landscapes, you are not particularly damaging them. Just look from afar and you already get the benefits. So that can be good for just damaging of the ecosystems. The local communities who know that the landscapes surrounding them are valuable and therapeutic and attract tourists, they will maintain those landscapes and the views and the ecosystems. Then the local natural and cultural heritage becomes a treatment, almost like a medical treatment that can be prescribed by the doctor. And we actually applied for one of the Horizon 2020 program this February, where sustainable tourism was a thing in it. And we proposed in it to run a study in Portugal that will be about sustainable tourism. So the topic of the call was developing nature-based therapy for health and well-being. And sustainable tourism is one of the goals in one of the work packages, where we, as NeuroLandscape, we designed a study that promotes the forest therapy for mental health and well-being of tourists that are visiting this region. At the same time, making profits, like economical profits for the region, and protecting the environment in the region. So we will see how this will go, but it will be very interesting and quite novel to connect the nature therapy, forest therapy, and sustainable tourism, and generate some new data about that, run some experiments in Portugal. If I'm not wrong, it was in the North Portugal region of Alto Minho. So that's pretty much it. I'm almost done with my slides. So just three main takeaways. First of all, sustainable tourism is the next big thing, and we are kind of approaching to that direction with our options and possibilities, and also the recent grant. And contemplative landscapes and health promotions are concepts very complementary to sustainable tourism and can benefit each other. And three, about the critics, I think we should listen to them, but just continue doing our thing. So with that, I want to thank you, and if there are any questions, please ask. That's it from me.